What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode here on The Remedy. I'm your host, Pastor D. It is my pleasure to be with you on this beautiful 86 degrees weather. As always, I'm not by myself today. We have the rest of the team here, well, some of them, as well as our beloved guest who's joining us today. Woody, what's going on? What's up? What's popping?
Okay. Hello. Happy Saturday.
You're looking gorgeous today. How are you?
Thank you. I figure I'll give you guys a little mohawk action.
All
Mohawk.
right, all right. Well, tell us a little bit about Tyler Diaz. What's happening, my man? How are you?
Hi, good. How are you? How is everybody today?
Good. Thank you so much for being here. We're gonna jump right in because we have a lot to cover. Because today we're gonna talk about a topic that some people might find difficult to digest. But let me just say, it's okay for you if that's the way you feel. I want you to know that it's okay. At the end of the day, we are here to learn as much as we can. And if you do have questions that you want to address to the panel or you want to address to Tyler, please feel free to address your questions. Okay. So, Woody, why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about our guest here today?
Tyler Alejandro Diaz is a licensed social worker in the state of New York. He has his degree from Arizona State in evolutionary psychology and a master's from Fordham University. His primary focus is young teens, youth and adults. Um, Tyler works really closely with the LGBTQIA plus community here in New York, and so Tyler's also one of my affectionate members of the thruple. There's three of us, and we love each other, I love him dearly. And so, for anyone on the show, you should look up a thruple if you don't know what that is. That's a little controversy right there. I thought he would be a great resource because oftentimes, as much as I like to think that I am, or not think, I know that I am an ally to the LGBTQ plus IA community, that's a mouthful. I often sometimes get things wrong, right? And so one of the things that I try to do is be insightful, and get information from good sources. And Tyler is a wealth of knowledge on this. So wanted to thank him in advance for being on there and also say happy Pride because it's the first Saturday of Pride. So this is a great way to tie in Pride and how in the show.
That's right. All right. So, as you know, I'm going to start this from a biblical perspective, okay? Because I have to. Is the pastor in me. So, here's the thing. Um, we all know if you go into the book of Genesis where it talks about God created male and female, right? And so, how then do you talk to someone or deal with the issue when we talk about someone that we may consider or is classified as intersex or hermaphrodite, right? Because if you strictly look at the word male and female, then you're gonna say, well, they are neither this or that. Is that a correct assumption to begin with?
That there's neither male or female.
That they are neither male or female because they are born with both.
I think
I
that if you're
guess.
looking from a
Okay. Go ahead.
perspective,
Mm-hmm. Sorry.
Go ahead, Dan.
I was just to say, if you're looking at a perspective of, the book that you're reading from, that there's a definition, if there is a specific definition, or if they're just using words. I think that there's a long biological history of intersex people, which is often incorrect and has been proven incorrect. And I think
Mhm.
that there's a plethora of knowledge and research of the different chromosomes that are expressed in people who are intersex and then assigned a different birth gender.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so I think that's one way of looking at it. But from a Christian point of view, I think what I was looking up is Galatians 3:28, And it says, if you are in Christ, you are the one chosen. You stand, inherit all of that God has promised. While we still may be ethnic, gender, social districts that carry weight in other contexts, those distinctions do not affect one standing as a child of God by faith and in Christ. There's
Mm.
neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, neither
We
male
are
nor
all.
female, for all we are one in Christ's love. And
Yes.
so, and so that would always be my, if you want to go from a biblical perspective, that would be my response, right? That like, he doesn't see that in you. He loves you for who you are.
Correct. Correct. Um, we do have someone who will be joining us. Deja, she's getting ready. And the reason why I wanted to bring this first is because I heard a lot of conversation around Genesis 1 in regards to male and female. But my thing is, at the same time, in Genesis 1, we never read sunrise and sunset, yet it exists, right? We don't see dawn and dusk, yet dawn and dusk exists, right? Um, so who will say that because they are not named, therefore they have to be the results of the fall? Because this is what I hear often, and I say, well, that's not a that's very a weak argument. It's a very weak argument to begin with, right? That this is the result of the fall. And I'm bringing this up because sometimes people say, well, what's happening in our world today, this is the result of the fall, not necessarily that God created us exactly the way we are, and that we experience different things, and science still hasn't catch up enough to determine or understand all of those things that are happening in our bodies.
So isn't it also that like when we can't explain anything that happens in the world, or we don't like something, we just blame it on the fall, right? Like we blame
Yeah,
it on the original sin, as
yeah,
opposed to having a real conversation that there are many things that we just don't understand or never even expected to have as a conversation. So by
correct.
default, it's easy to just say, well, it's because of the fall, the Adam and Eve, and all of these other things, because we just don't want to deal with it. It's a way of like kind of putting it in a closet, for lack of a better term, right? Like,
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take a little bit of time to introduce to you the person who just popped in right now, Deja Alvarez. Hi, Deja.
Hey, Mandy. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I haven't seen Mandy in a long time, so I'm excited to see him.
It's definitely been a long time. Thank you so much for being here. Deja, would you take about 30 seconds to tell everyone a little bit about you, and then we'll just keep moving forward in the show.
Sure. My name is Dejalyn Alvarez. I am a very proud Latina transgender woman. I work in public health and politics. I'm currently running for state representative in the city of Philadelphia. And I also work at the Department of Public Health, and I also work at an organization called World Healthcare Infrastructures. I'm a very loud and proud advocate and activist in the city, and
She is loud.
where
She is really loud.
and I consider myself a barrier breaker of sorts.
Yeah, and Deja, I just want to publicly say thank you so much. I just reached out to Deja last night, and in the middle of our conversation, I got a feeling she fell asleep or her phone died because I didn't hear a thing from her, right? But she reached out to me this morning, and I gave her the information so that if she's able to, she can come and join us. And here she is. So,
Yeah, I
Deja,
was just on a Zoom call. I apologize. I was just on a Zoom call with the State Democratic Party, the Latina caucus, and then I have another Zoom call in about 7 more minutes. But I
uh-oh.
had to pop in just because Mondi, of course, I consider Mondi quite the barrier breaker himself. He's trying to show folks, in my mind, that religion is not hateful. Religion can actually be loving and accepting of everyone. And I so respect that. I respect Mandy as just a person. He's such a wonderful person. So thanks for even asking me to come, Mandy.
Thank you. And I know you have to go. So, because of that, I'm going to put you on the spot. because one of the things that we wanted to do on the show, we wanted to talk about some of the things that people have to go through. For example, dealing with the hatred that is associated with being a transgender. Can you talk about the violence that is associated with that and what exactly is being done, or if there's anything being done about that?
So there is some things being done about that. And then of course it also depends on where you're geographically located. So I can use the city of Philadelphia for example. I worked with the city many years ago to create a new directive, and it was the first new directive in I think it was like 30 years. For the Philadelphia Police Department and how they deal with LGBTQ, particularly transgender individuals, whether they're the perpetrators or the victims of crimes. But I think, as we've all seen throughout history, throughout movements, that just because slavery got abolished and it became illegal to discriminate against someone based on their race, we still see that happening on an everyday basis. So getting policies and legislation passed is just the beginning of what we need to do. We need to start having more conversations like this openly and loudly so that people understand that you don't have to hate us. Transgender women of color are 9 times more likely to experience violence and murder, particularly Black transgender women, excuse me. Um, LGBTQ teens have a higher suicide rate.
Mhm.
Transgender teens have an even higher suicide rate. 40% of all youth homelessness in this country are LGBTQ folks. 40% of
40%.
that, 40%, 40% of that 40% are transgender youth. So being transgender, no matter how you identify, whether you are a transgender man or a transgender woman, or if you are non-binary, um, you are just way more likely to experience violence and discrimination on many levels. There were times that I would go to a hotel and I would be denied access to the hotel if someone figured out that I was trans. Um, I have been abused by the police for years and years and years and years. Um, and it happens everywhere because no matter where you go, there's somebody that has a personal bias. I've also experienced a lot of bias in churches, and I have turned away from religion altogether. I was raised Baptist, and by the time that I hit my teen years and can start to think for myself, I thought, wait, I don't think this is supposed to hurt this much. I'm not supposed to be listening to a message. If I'm there on Sunday, I'm supposed to be hearing about love and acceptance. And I'm hearing, yeah, love and acceptance, unless you're gay or unless you're trans. Um, so just hearing those kinds of messages, and I find amongst my own community, so many of us who were raised within a religion still want to believe and still want to be a part of a religion and find it very difficult to be in a space where we feel as though we're safe and accepted.
Mhm.
Um, job discrimination. Transgender people are discriminated against on the job so many times. When I came on board at the Department of Public Health, I'm a very public persona, and that's one of the reasons I think Dr. Kwakwa brought me on. And, within the Department of Public Health, there's still a lot of discrimination. They've toned it down some with me being around because they know that I am someone who has built a lot of power. So I can call the mayor, I can call any senator, I can call any state rep, I can call any city council person directly if there's a problem. But it was more of an issue. Our team was trying to build networks and resources for the most marginalized folks without tipping everything upside down. So it became difficult. And I faced a lot of discrimination within the Department of Public Health that sometimes I felt like I had to deal with it because otherwise it was going to interrupt the hard work we were already trying to do for people. So we experience it on the job. We experience it walking down the street. We experience it when we go into stores. We experience it when we're just out shopping. We experience it when we're with our families for the holidays. So the amount of mental and emotional harm that is done to us is severe, and that can often lead to severe mental health issues.
Mhm.
And then you talk about trying to find a therapist. You go to a therapist who has a personal bias or who doesn't have an understanding how your identity plays a direct part in your mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And so you run into a problem there. One of the reasons that we created the clinic that we did inside of the Department of Public Health was because so many people, not just LGBTQ, but immigrant folks, undocumented folks, folks from Africa, folks from South America were experiencing a lot of discrimination within the Department of Public Health. And, you know, Dr. Kwakwa and Umar and Mundi and the amazing team were able to help create a clinic that focused, specialized on those folks so that they could kind of be protected from what was happening to them just trying to receive medical services.
Deja, before you go, I would love to talk to you about policy real quick. I know, you know, a few years ago, the whole thing was trans women in bathrooms or trans people in bathrooms. And now the goalpost has moved because, you know, they couldn't really cite that many sources of women being attacked in bathrooms. And so now they've transitioned to trans people in sports. And one of the things that I always find interesting is that they keep on talking about girl sports, but they don't have an issue with a trans boy joining a team. And so to me, that's why it's always been like a false narrative. And so if you can give us a little insight on that policy, how demeaning that is, and what are some of the policies that we can look into to support to combat that type of rhetoric that seems to be taking over what's happening in our political discourse.
Absolutely. So I'll say this: data doesn't lie. Mundi knows data is something. Listen. I'm not a data person. I can't stand looking at numbers all day. But data doesn't lie. And so when they highlight a cisgender female sports, someone who's in high school playing sports, and they're saying, "Oh, but I got hurt by a transgender woman. I'm playing field hockey and she tackled me too hard, or I got a head injury." I can give you 1,000 other examples where 1,000 other cisgendered females gave head injuries to each other on the field hockey team. So you want to take that one incident and magnify it and act like those other 1,000 didn't happen. So one of the things that I do when I have people present me with stuff like that, I come back at them with the data and the facts. Here's the facts. Here's the fact. Actually, 60% of the women that play field hockey get some sort of injury. And transgender women are just starting to join these teams. So where did these numbers come from prior to that? I get a lot of people that say to me, "Well, Deja, like, I respect who you are, but I don't want my children seeing it on TV." You don't want your children. Well, you have some older kids too, right? And, you know, oftentimes they do because they're older. But they're like, "Well, yeah. Well, your child saw a whole lot of doctors on TV, but they didn't turn out to be a doctor."
Right.
So why do you think if they see somebody who's trans or gay or whatever on TV that's how they're going to turn out to be? But they're trying to push legislation. Funny thing is, Texas just shot that down. I was worried that was going to pass in Texas, that bill in Texas was going to pass about transgender athletes, and it didn't. It narrowly got shot down, but it got shot down. And we're starting to see a trend with that. We're starting to see places that people are starting to wake up and people are starting to realize. Here in Pennsylvania, we're still fighting to get, gender identity and sexual orientation added to the equality bill here in the state of Pennsylvania. We're trying to make it an actual law in Pennsylvania. A lot of local areas like Philadelphia has it as a policy. A lot of little local areas and boroughs have put it on their policy, but we're fighting for it statewide. And although we saw Joe Biden, who one of the first things he did was undo some of the harmful stuff that Trump did around transgender people with health care, giving healthcare providers the right to discriminate against us based on their religious beliefs. He rolled that back. That's not enough. We need federal law that clearly states that you cannot discriminate against us based on anything. So we already have that based on your race, based on your gender. It needs to be based on your gender identity and sexual orientation. And again, I reiterate, that doesn't mean that stops it. That's just the beginning. Because here we are, 50, 60 years later, still fighting racism and hate and bigotry and murder by the police. So we know that that's not the end all for everything, but we know that that definitely helps, and it's kind of a starting point for us to get to. So, and you were right, that bathroom bill, when they were trying to pass that, they couldn't produce one piece of data, not one, of a transgender woman attacking a child in
Yeah.
a bathroom. Not one.
Not
And
one.
my argument for people when they presented that to me was, so do you really think that any man who is a predator that that has stopped them all these years, that all of a sudden that's going to open up the door, they're all going to go out and buy wigs and run into the women's room? They would have already been doing that.
I'm
It,
always confused about that too, because I'm like, there are bathroom stalls. Like you're in a private area in the bathroom. So like, what do I know what's happening? You know what I mean? Like that never made any sense to me. And so, I also wanted to ask about, I don't know, Tyler, do you have any questions before I go on?
say that again.
No, I was asking Tyler if he had any questions for you. Um, Real quickly, Deja, Tyler is a therapist and deals with a lot of LGBT youth in New York City. And so
Oh, love that.
yeah, so he, I don't know if you guys have any questions for each other. I wanted to give you the opportunity.
Great to meet you, Deja.
Great to meet you as well. Do you have your own practice, or who do you work for?
I work 2 practices. I work for Latino Support in Queens, working with primarily, teens and young adults of the Latino community. And I also work for another private practice in Manhattan, where I'm going to be working with young adults as well, teens and young adults.
Wonderful, wonderful. I love to hear that, because it's very hard to find competent mental health providers for a lot of marginalized communities.
Yeah, you said something earlier about your experience with religion. And so I wanted to, what would be your advice for a young person who is conflicted with their faith and who they identify with sexually, or not sexually, their gender identity, not sexually?
So a young person who is conflicted already with their sexual orientation or gender identity, and they're going to church, they're with their family, and their family doesn't know at this point.
Yeah.
The advice for them is to just try and stay as strong as you can. Find some support somewhere. Maybe a teacher that you can trust. Maybe one of your friends' parents. I run into this a lot. I get I bought a new car back in July, and apparently they messed up the title somehow. And the woman called from Oklahoma from the dealership, and I was on the phone with her the other day, and she was trying to find the state paperwork she had to send me, and something came across her thing about changing your gender marker on IDs, and she goes, "Oh, that came across on the Delaware Motor Vehicle page. That's funny." And that wasn't even what she was looking for. And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "Well, how do you feel about that?" She's like, "Well, I don't feel any type of way about that." She said, everybody can do what they want to do." I said, "Oh, I'm glad to hear that, because I actually did that on my ID." And she said, "Oh, really?" It turned out to be a good conversation, where she then filled me in that her kids had friends when they were growing up that were LGBTQ, and they couldn't come out to their own parents, and somehow they felt comfortable enough to come out to her. So, but there's also a lot of resources online. So they have to find somebody that they trust, and it's very hard to ask a youth to do, to trust someone with a secret that they're holding on to so closely. I remember when I was growing up and keeping my secret and being in church every Sunday and hearing those messages over and over and over again. I didn't quite understand at that time who I was inside, but I knew I was different. I knew I was a girl, not a boy, but I didn't have anybody else around me that I could talk to about that. But the messages that I was receiving through church were just very, very difficult for me to hear. And I also tell folks now, there's a lot more churches that are a lot more open.
Right.
And you don't have to go to just one church. You can go, churches are just like doctors. You continue to go to a different one until you find the one that fits you, and that's okay. Same thing with therapists, right, Tyler? Same thing with therapists. I have people that come to me and say,
Absolutely. I tell everybody that.
yeah, they're like, they'll come to me, Deja, my therapist, I like them for some things, but they just don't understand that my gender identity plays such a part in my everyday life and what I go through. And they kind of try to ignore that part. And I tell them, you're free to change therapists and go to anyone. And sometimes you might have to try 4 or 5 different therapists before you find the right one. You're not going to put on a pair of shoes that doesn't fit quite right and then buy them. You're going to try on some other shoes until you find the one that fits right. And you can do the same with a therapist or a doctor or with a church and with a pastor. I personally no longer believe in organized religion, but I do recognize and respect the fact that so many people get so much from religion. And I love and respect the fact that there's folks like Mundy out there, and there's folks, there's a church here that I do events for every once in a while in Philadelphia. They'll call and ask me to help them out with something. And I absolutely do. Even though it's not my thing, I recognize that there are many people in the community that need that, and they get something from it. And if it helps them, I'll do whatever I can to help them as well. So for youth, that's one of the hardest things. Trying to get them to open up about who they truly are at such a young age is very difficult. And the only thing you can do is hope that they find somebody that they can trust and open up to.
Yeah.
So Tyler, the same question, but what would be your advice to parents, I guess?
Ooh.
I think that, we're seeing that affirmation is what is going to support your young people and your teens these days. You may not understand something, but, like we've all been saying, like, you don't have to understand the biology of what's going on in your body. That's why you go to your doctor. You don't have to understand exactly everything that's happening. And young people know what they're experiencing, and listening to their experiences and validating them is the best thing that you can do. That's why the suicide rates are so high amongst LGBTQ teens, is because they're told fundamentally that they're wrong and that they were not created correctly for some reason, or that the choices that they made were incorrect. And if you believe that, then you have an identity crisis. And when you have that identity crisis, you don't feel valid.
Mm-hmm.
So really just affirming a person for their existence is what is the best thing that a parent can do for a teen.
And there's now data out there that shows that just that simple affirmation or that acceptance from a parent lowers the suicide rate drastically. And now that there's data out there, I try to collect that and use that, because I do get parents that reach out to me and they're like, okay, so I saw you on this thing and somebody said maybe I could talk with you. I'm really struggling with who my kid is. And and my thing is always just, at the end of the day, does this truly change who your kid is? Does it bother you because maybe it changes what your idea of what your child was supposed to be is? Or does it bother you because you think now your child isn't going to be able to be who they already know they were? You have to figure out whether you're holding on to, whether it was your own perception of you had your whole child's life planned out. And now that bothers you. My other half lives in St. Augustine, and he has a 4-year-old daughter, and he has right now his 16-year-old niece living with him, and they're from New York. And her mother, I was just down there a couple weeks ago, and her and I went out. I took her and her girlfriend out because she's actually gay. And I took her and her girlfriend and our 4-year-old, she is kind of our 4-year-old now, out for dinner. And we were talking about it, and she was telling me she just recently had a conversation with her mom where her mom said, I just don't understand how you're ever going to understand how you could be sexually pleased with a woman, because you have to have some of this and some of that in order to be sexually pleased. And this teenager had relayed to their mother that they were uncomfortable with their breast. They felt like they might want to get rid of their breast. And the mother went into a whole thing. I will never speak to you again. I'm going to have to go have another child because I wanted a daughter that I was going to be able to dress up and put in little dresses, and was going to wear a prom gown, and was going to, walk down the aisle in a pretty white dress. And I looked at Jordan and I just said, Jordan, you do realize that entire conversation was about your mother and what she wanted. Not one single part of that conversation was about you as her child. She said she's going to have another child just so she can dress them up the way she is having children for the wrong reason. She thinks they're Barbie dolls. Next time she says that to you, tell your mother I said, go buy a
Yes.
damn Barbie doll.
I remember the first time, and this happened while I was
Absolutely.
at Andrews, and we had a professor who actually came out and share with the rest of the class that she's been married, she has 3 children, and one of the kids actually came out and said, "Mom, I think I'm different, and this is how I think I'm different." And she mentioned to us how she always knew that there was something different about her son, but she could never accept the fact that this is what it was, because they all, I mean, she said, I raised 3 boys, they all grew up in the same household, loved by both husband and a wife in the household, they all went to church, went to the same school. What did I do wrong? That was the question she asked. Like, it was as if it was something that she did with that particular kid. That's the reason why the kid turned out that way. But to make a long story short, at the end of her presentation, she went full circle. And I think that's the beauty of us having this discussion. That sometimes parents, they might mean well, but sometimes the dealing with it, the initial shock may be hard on them as well, and they may not know how to articulate what they are feeling in a positive way to their son or daughters. So I think I'm saying that to say I feel what you're saying, Deja, and I also feel that we have to look at both sides, like the parent side and from the child perspective as well, because they are all dealing with a lot at that particular time. Granted, the child is probably dealing with so much more, because you as a parent, you're supposed to have the strength to deal with whatever comes your way,
Yes.
but that child is looking at you, because you are my mother, you are that special someone that I trust. And if I cannot talk to you about something that is dear to me, who else can I talk to? You know what I mean? So it's definitely really hard. Like, I put myself in that situation many times and ask myself, how would I react? If my daughters came out to me or my sons came out to me and said, Dad, I think I'm like this or I think I'm like that, my original reaction would be, oh boy, why me? I'm telling you, I would say that, right?
but
At the
but
end of
I'll
the
say
day, I would turn around and hug my
yes.
kids even
See, you
deeper, and,
would.
and let them know, you know what? I may not understand everything about this, but we're gonna be on this journey together. I'm gonna learn to love you as much as I can possibly love you, though it may be different than what I thought. You know what I mean?
Well, and I agree with you. I do oftentimes, I tell families that I talk with, I often tell them, I recognize that this is a journey now for everyone. If we're talking about gender identity, it's not just the child transitioning, it is also the parents and the siblings and
Correct.
everybody else transitioning too. But exactly how you just put it, by just simply saying, look, I don't necessarily understand this yet, but I still love you. You're my child. That's fine. Absolutely respect that. And I think for me, another thing, one of the messages that I put out there oftentimes in my speaking engagements and in my trainings and courses and all of that is I oftentimes tell people that that old adage, that old religious thing in the Bible, respect thy mother and father, that goes both ways, because you're supposed to respect your mother and father because that mother and father is supposed to love their child unconditionally. If they don't, and if they are toxic, you do not have to keep them in your life. So I don't promote that message of respect thy mother and father or respect my aunt or respect my grandmother. If you cannot respect me, then I don't have to have you in my life. I don't have to disrespect you, but I can cut you out of my life. And I've watched many transgender people deal with family members and still go to family events knowing they were going to be disrespected and degraded and leave there so broken mentally. But yet they still went because they were brought up to believe that was their duty and that's their family and that they have to go through that. And I think we need to, it's just like now, I do not tell Natalie is the 4-year old. When people want to touch her or hug her or anything else, I leave that up to Natalie. I don't tell her to go up and hug anybody. If Natalie wants to hug them, she can hug them. But if Natalie looks at me and says, no, nope, stop. I'm not going to do, and I know we did that a lot when I was young. I remember, your parents always, oh,
Yeah,
be
yeah.
nice, oh, do this. It's the same thing with young adults that you don't have to, I'm not going to tell you that you have to respect somebody just because they happen to have given birth or because they donated the sperm for you to be born. I don't believe in that.
Mhm, mhm. You're on mute. No, we can't hear you. Okay, you can go
I, you
back
know,
and
I
come
think
back.
that Deja brings up a really important point in that, working in the Latino community, often working with young girls as well, when, there's often sexual abuse or rape and they're by a family member and they're told like, that's your dad, that's your uncle, like that's a family, you have to forgive them. And
Yeah.
working through that construct and these perceptions that because that's a family member, that they're important, that's just a word that's prescribed to this person. It doesn't mean anything. There, yeah, you're connected by blood and that there is this initial connection, but there's a that person did not act in the best interest of that person and of that child. That person stole something from that child and they don't get that honor of having that title anymore. If it's such an important word, take that word away from them. They're no longer that important person. I think it's
Mhm.
great, Deja. You're setting boundaries for that 4-year-old. Like that person give children are intuitive, and we give them enough
Yeah,
credit, and they know when what's safe and what's unsafe, and we have to respect their own boundaries.
Yes, and my other half has done a tremendous job raising her. He's basically raised her by himself, and he has taught her how to be such a strong. She has such a self awareness of what she wants, what she doesn't want, what she likes, and she will go up and talk to anybody. So when I do see her uncomfortable around somebody, that tells me she knows what she feels, and that's just from him making sure she is such a self-awareness and such an individual identity at such a young age. So I try to look for that in other children as well. That they understand it. And then you're right, there's a huge issue within the Latino community, and I believe within the Black community as well, where they know that Uncle so and so gets a little too touchy feely with the daughters and the nieces and all that every Thanksgiving, but they still invite him and nobody really talks about it. They just say, oh, let's just keep him away from them. Why are you inviting this person to this
yeah,
event? And it
yeah.
goes back to, we are taught that if someone is blood, that we have to be attached to them somehow. We do not have to be attached to them. I have to be attached to my liver, to my kidney, to my foot, to my whatever. I do not have to be attached to someone that happens to share the same DNA as me.
Can you guys hear me now? Can you hear me
Yep,
now?
yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So we did a show about this a while ago about one of the things that would happen specifically like within the Latin and the Haitian communities, like when you're a child, they would make you go greet someone with a kiss and a hug, and how detrimental that was. Because it means I didn't have autonomy of my body and who I was at a young age because I was forced to do it, right? And so um we were like, okay, no more. This has to, like, we have to be the generation that stops that, because
Yes.
it is a practice that we don't realize the, like, long-term trauma, because what that is that when that person is abusing you, you're allowing them to get closer and closer to that child, and that child now can't differentiate between someone who's doing harm and someone who, you know what I mean, who isn't. So it's a very confusing thing. um Tyler, I wanted to ask you a question. What are some of the things, like when you're dealing with some of these, with young adults and teens who are part of the LGBTQIA community? That is so long. Um, I always feel like I have to take a breath when I say it. What are some of the real struggles that they have, um, that they are coming to you for? What are some of the prevalent topics, I guess I should ask?
So I think what's happening now, especially with Gen Z, with the youth of today, is a lot different than what all of us experienced with our own sexuality as we were growing up. The internet is a powerful, powerful thing. And what I'm finding interesting is that people are finding online communities that support who they are. And I think that right now with youth, they're not having these like coming out moments, they're having these long developments. And that's
Mhm.
what teens are really like how and it's a great thing. Like they get to like build who they are and understand who they are. It's not they're not struggling with something, I remember when I was in the process and earlier we were talking about church, and I remember being in the church, and I was raised Catholic, and I had to go to confirmation camp. And I remember that I can remember every moment of that because it was just so horrible for me, experiencing being told how wrong you are and what's going on and your life is wrong. But nowadays with these online communities and these forums, they can ask questions and people can be like, oh yeah, I've experienced this, or they can create, different types of worlds or, communities that support and endorse their identity development. I think that's a beautiful thing now. And I think that that's what parents need to focus on, is just facilitating. Even if you have a child who is heterosexual and cisgender, you're supporting them as they grow older, as they go through puberty. Their body is going to change, and you're going to have a conversation with them as they begin to become attracted to the same sex, the same opposite sex, the same gender, whatever it is. You're facilitating that growth. And I think that parents need to be that role model for the child in order to subscribe to like what their norm is.
I would like to ask both of you guys. I think one of the things that often gets conflicted is sexual identity and gender
Yeah.
identity. And
Oh,
if we can have a little bit, a little bit of a conversation on the difference between the two, right? And like, go ahead. If you want to jump in, Deja, so go ahead.
so there's this whole argument right now about whether the T should be removed from the LGBTQ. And, I'm a firm believer. One of the things that I do in politics and everything else is that I believe that we need to build bridges amongst marginalized communities, because if we can bring marginalized communities together, that's how we build power. When we have that power, that's how we make change. So I understand the reasoning for the argument, because I have to explain to people. I do speaking engagements and trainings and stuff all the time where I'm like, let me explain to you. Yes, I am a transgender woman. I am in a relationship with a man. I am a heterosexual woman. And I see people do that Scooby Doo, that, huh? And he is a heterosexual man. And they're like, wait, how can that be? Because you're confusing sexual orientation with gender identity. I am a woman. He is a man. I am not sleeping with a woman. If I was sleeping with a woman, I'd be a lesbian, or at the minimum bisexual, and there's nothing wrong with that. So trying to get people to understand. So sometimes I simply put it like this: sexual orientation is who you go to bed with. Gender identity is who you go to bed as. And that's the difference. And, having this discussion with folks hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, and trying to get them to wrap their hands or their heads around that can be a difficult concept. But if you simplify it, I find oftentimes if you just put it in the simplest terms, and I've watched many people understand it when I said to them, sexual orientation is who you go to bed with. Gender identity is who you go to bed as. And they're like, oh, well, maybe, okay. So, and then oftentimes people are basing it because they haven't had any real interaction with, say, a trans woman or, a trans man or whatever. And then once they do, it starts to normalize it a little bit and maybe make it a little easier for them to try and comprehend some of the things we're trying to tell them.
Okay, so I have a few more. Bunty, you have questions? So I feel like I'm asking all of the questions.
Well, I wanted to transition from your question.
Okay.
There was an article that I shared with you dealing with that. And this particular article, the premise of it is that this transgender um, woman, well, he transitioned into, well, he's in the process of transitioning, but then he wanted to go and get
She's still a
uh,
she. She's she's pre-operational trans, so she's still a
Correct.
okay.
So she wanted to go and get what do you call that woman?
Okay,
Uh,
I can
Go
give
ahead.
you.
Would you explain it for me,
Okay,
Woody?
so okay,
You're more comfortable
Only
with
because I know Monday so well, and I know Monday never tries to hurt anybody. I can laugh at the way this is being done right now. Like if I didn't know Monday, my one eyebrow would be raised and my face would be sideways. Like really? But because I know Monday so well, I know he's just tripping over his
yeah,
words.
yeah. So I'm gonna help my cousin out. So it's an article that was written in Psychology Today by I can't remember the name of this psychologist,
I'll
and
pull it up.
he was giving an example of a trans woman in Canada who went to go get wax at a female wanted to get a Brazilian wax at a spa that primarily deals with women, and didn't and because this woman is pre-operational, still has the gender she was assigned at birth, right? And so when she went to go get wax, didn't inform them that she was trans, and the people there had kind of like a visceral reaction, and and then it became, I think he wanted to sue because she wanted to sue, excuse me, because she said that they were being transphobic. And
Okay.
so and then this article went on to describe this person as having inappropriate relationship with young women, and doing a whole bunch of other things. And so that was, and what the person was trying to I guess articulate was that it wasn't like your gender, I the identity doesn't matter, because you yourself can't designate what your identity is, and that we have to take into account society's views of your identity. So that was the premise of this super problematic article. I told Monday last night I thought this was straight trash. I had sent it to Tyler. There's a link to it there, and so that's the gist of it. Monday, now you can ask your questions since I
So
kind of
I wanted Deja then to kind of explain it to us again, because you say gender is who you go to bed, you identify with, correct?
Who identify as, yes.
As so, and in this particular case, were they wrong for refusing to provide services to that woman, because what she wants is not actually what they provide. She didn't have the
Right.
right genitals, if I could use that.
Well, no, now, but that's the thing. You can wax any part of the body. If you're doing waxing, you can still get a bikini wax, whether you have a penis or not. So, but I will say this, that if you're going to an establishment for something like that, the onus is kind of on you to make sure that they're okay with that before you go. I,
Yeah.
as a transgender woman, I know when I am going to a doctor's office or when I'm going for anything in particular, that there are some places where it is smarter for me to say over the phone, hey, I want to, I am a transgender woman. I want to make sure that you provide these services there. If I'm going to go get a bikini wax, I am going to make sure that the person that is about to spread my legs open and look at my business is aware of my business. I'm not just going to lay there and be like, well, surprise, and then get mad when they are like, oh, wait a minute, hold on, this isn't what I thought it was, blah, blah, blah. So I do feel as though she was a little wrong in this instance. Now, what I don't know how it was handled, by the business. If the business refused and just said, I'm sorry, we can't do this, then I'm not so angry at them if they presented it in a nice way, or whatever. But I do also find that oftentimes in this big progressive movement, while we are definitely trying to hold others accountable and hold society accountable and hold religion accountable, we are losing track of holding ourselves accountable for some of our own actions. And I think that that is important to make sure that we do that. And in that instance, if I'm going to get a bikini wax, yeah, I'm going to tell them that I'm transgender.
So I think the thing with this article, and Mundy just shared it, I think that this person is just a problematic person to begin with. I don't think she's
Which can very often happen.
right. Like, I don't think that has to do, I think that person, and also when you read the article, it like the person was like, it went into literally how a woman gets waxed, and it like gave details about a vulva. And I'm like, well, first of all, I didn't need to know all of that. Like, right. And so, like, that to me was like, it was a very like I sent it to Tyler last night, and he said it reads as transphobic. And I agreed because the tone and the tenor of it. And so for me, that example is a problematic person who happens
Yes.
to be trans, right?
Yes.
Because they went in there purposely trying to rile someone up. Tyler, did you
Yes,
want
absolutely.
to?
And we see that amongst all populations, right?
Yes.
We see that amongst all marginalized. I have watched a lot of people that I know use the Black Lives Matter movement to protect themselves from all their own wrongdoing. If they go in and rob a store and then get caught, oh, I got caught because the cop was racist, or I got caught because the store owner was racist, or I did this because they were racist. No, you got caught because your ass went in there and robbed the store. Oh, excuse me for cursing. This is a religious thing.
Now we curse on
No,
But
it's okay.
so I take offense when I also see this amongst some of my sisters where they are problematic and they are angry at the world, and I understand those feelings. I do. You're angry at the world because of everything we have been put through. But if you get hired at a job and then you have I know a trans woman at one point drop kicked her boss, drop kicked him. And then she went online after she got fired and they fired me because I'm a black trans woman and because I'm a this. So she came over to my house for dinner shortly after that, and I had invited some other girlfriends of ours over. And I had already told them, I said, listen, I'm letting y'all know now, when we're all at dinner, I'm going to tell her about herself. Because her and I are very, very close. So we were at this dinner. I told her, I said, by the way, Sissy, you're wrong. I would never call her out publicly. But I told her, I said, you're wrong. Nowhere in the world can you drop kick your boss and think you're going to
right.
keep your job. Nowhere. So I do find situations like that problematic. And I think in the middle of this super progressive movement, which I absolutely love, that we are pushing the needle forward and we are making people see things for what they are, that we cannot lose track of our own accountability. And that honestly, me as a transgender advocate and activist, and I am probably one of the most well-known in a very large area, we'll just say, that I find it super problematic for me in this movement when I see my trans siblings utilizing the movement to shield themselves from their own bad actions. I feel like you are co-opting the movement. I feel like you are damaging the movement. And I feel like we cannot be telling everybody else they have to be accountable for something when we're not holding ourselves and each other within our own movements accountable for our actions.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tyler and I have this conversation all the time, and Tyler and I, one of the, I don't like, it's not time to bash, but Caitlyn Jenner always comes up as like, and I'm like, I don't understand how Caitlyn has become the voice of trans women when she has never.
She has not. She thinks she wants to be.
And it's unfortunate because she has done more detriment, in my opinion, to that movement than good.
Well, so I have a little bit of an argument for that. So when Caitlyn Jenner first started to transition, I do a group here on Tuesdays for trans individuals, and everybody was like, oh, Caitlyn, and this is before she said anything dumb or did anything dumb, whatever. And they were like, oh, she shouldn't be, they shouldn't be giving her airtime because she has all this money and she was able to go get all these surgeries and she came out on the cover of a national magazine and this and that and the other. And I said, now, wait a minute. If any of us sitting at this table had that money and that access, we would have done our transition the same way. I would have went and got every surgery I could possibly get and then plastered my big ass right across the cover of Marie Claire or whatever magazine it was. I can't remember which. and did my whole coming out story. So I don't hold that against her. And I used to consider it the privilege of spending about an hour and a half with Caitlyn Jenner. And this was very early on when she was trying to understand things and she was open to listening. And we were in a room together. It was a big event and people had paid a lot of money to be there with her. I didn't pay, of course. But I was in that room as well, luckily. And when I was the only other trans person, so when she saw me, she came directly for me, and we spent the whole time talking with each other. And this was very early on. And she kept saying to me, she said, Deja, this is hard. I didn't realize how hard this was. She said, I want to do the right thing, especially for my trans siblings, but I guess sometimes I don't always go about it the right way, or I don't know what to say. And I said, well, Caitlyn, listen, you spent 65 years of your life as a very white, very privileged, very famous, and very wealthy person. So you bring those 65 years of experience into who you are now as Caitlyn, and you can't just get rid of those views. At the time, I thought she was working on it. Of course, now we know she's a great big asshole and should just shut up and go away and go live up in the mountains somewhere. But in the beginning, I felt strongly that we had to give her an opportunity. And now, unfortunately, she has taken that opportunity and wasted it. But that doesn't undo the fact that Caitlyn Jenner shined a light on the transgender community that had never been shined before. And while she has created some discourse and done some damage, it doesn't undo the fact that she made transgender people center stage and the center of a national conversation that to a level that it had never reached before. So I always look for the positive in things. I'm grateful for that. Do I think she's a great big asshole? Yes.
I think that what also in this discourse is that we're elevating celebrity status, and that's not a lot of people's experience. And like, you know, when I used to work with LGBTQ foster youth, and you know, most of the people that I worked with were people of color. And you know, when we talk about celebrities like Laverne Cox, you know, that's not their idol. And I think that we need more people like you, Deja, and more people like Sarah McBride, like people who are, you know, it's attainable. You know, when we think about like pyramid schemes, right? You think about like, oh, I'm going to be that millionaire one day. I'm going to reach that millionaire status. But the reality is you're not. And that's what our youth are seeing today, is that,
hey, don't destroy my
they
dream.
have to exist in this world. they have to get to this. They have to exist in society, not as Caitlyn Jenner, not as Laverne Cox. They have to exist as themselves, as the social worker that is working in a nonprofit. They have to exist as the sales clerk at a car dealership. They have to exist as themselves. They have to walk within their neighborhoods of Brooklyn or in Los Angeles or in Kentucky, where, you know, wherever they live. They have to exist as that person, and they don't have that spotlight or that protection of money for themselves. And so, you know, part of
No, go ahead. I was just agreeing with you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I kind of just said it out loud. I meant to keep it in my head. I do that sometimes.
No, I think I'm on delay, so I see people moving, and I have to stop to make sure I hear everything. But yeah, I think that, like, you know, common discourse is around these, like, this spotlight, which is important. It's important for our generation, you know, for us to be highlighted. You know, years ago that just wasn't the case. And now it's out and proud. And now, like you said, Deja, we have to have our own accountability. I'm always still learning. And like you said earlier, Deja, like I tell people when I do an intake with a client, I say, listen, like I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. This doesn't have to work. You are also interviewing me. Ask me questions. What do you want out of therapy? What are you expecting? And I'm also going to learn. I don't know everything.
I can still hear you. I have to step up.
You know, I'm not of trans experience. I'm not of trans experience. My gender expression fluctuates, but I still identify as a male. And so when you're talking with people, I often tell people that it's definitely an interview, and we have to be willing to educate people and also correct people. And when I'm corrected, I have to be willing to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But I think we all have to do that, right? Because even me, and I tell people this, that I now oftentimes talk about non-binary people because they don't get as much of the attention as we do as trans people now. So I try to talk about them, but I had to work through my own feelings about non-binary people because as a trans woman, I thought, wait a minute, hold on. So I had to fight to be who I am. And now here comes these people that are going to tell society after we're just starting to make some leeway here that now I don't want to be recognized as any gender. And I'm like, get the hell out of here. Make up your mind. Be one or the other because you're not going to drag me down this rabbit hole. I just climbed out of it. But I had to realize that as a trans woman, I cannot look at things that way. I have to respect them because all they're asking for is the same thing that I am asking for, and that is to be accepted for who I tell you that I am. And I had to work
And
through
it's just
that.
a different experience.
Yes,
And it's just a different experience. It's you know, people who, a lot of my youth are non-binary, and for me it's easy to accept. It's actually a lot easier to have the conversation about, you know, gender norms and what's placed on society, and it allows for broader conversation of what's expected of people and what we put on people. You know, some of the youth that I work with, they are non-binary, but because of the way they present and the way that society perceives them, we have to discuss how women are treated in society and the type of harassment that women go through, and then
Yes.
how it impacts them. And you know, like in the DSM, you know, as a therapist, I go by DSM. I had to diagnose people, and it was until I believe the '90s that homosexuality and transgender and transsexualism, it was transsexualism at the time, was a diagnosis to deem people as, you know, crazy. And now we have gender dysphoria, and what I find interesting is gender dysphoria is the perception of the person. It's not a lot of people experience gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is put onto the person, and I work through a lot of that because we place in society these values of a person. A woman needs to be feminine, a man needs to be macho, and when you're not that, you're considered dysphoric, and that's just not the case. And we have it as, you know, a diagnosis now for insurance company to categorize people, but that's just not the case. And, you know, when as a therapist I go and work through this stuff, and you realize, oh, like this person knows exactly who they are, and that's fabulous to me. Like, you're like, oh, you're gender dysphoria. Yes. You're not, you know, we don't have to diagnose you as gender dysphoria. You know exactly who you are. It's other people who are confused, and
they're the ones that are dysphoric, not me. I am not dysphoric about who I am and what my gender is. Trust me, there is no dysphoria about it. They are the ones that are dysphoric. But, you know, we live in a world where everybody has to be labeled and put into a category, especially for insurance purposes. So that part definitely sucks. And I'll say this. I remember I was in Baltimore and I was fighting for the bathroom bill, or fighting against the bathroom bill in Baltimore. This was a decade or so ago. And we were fighting against the bathroom bill, and we were trying to build a safe haven for transgender youth and LGBTQ youth. And so we had a meeting at a church because the building was going to be right near this church. And, you know, some of the church members were like, you know, they're sitting there with their Bibles and they're, well, the Bible says, and I'm not going to let my child, and I don't want them around my children. I don't want, you know, blah, blah. And I said, look, I'm just going to simplify it by saying this. With a 40% suicide rate, you have an almost 50% chance of losing your child. Now, I want you to think about something. Every night when you go in there and you tuck that baby into bed and you say, good night, I love you, and God loves you. What happens when you walk in there that first night that they're no longer there? Are you going to tuck your Bible in, or do you want to continue to tuck your child in? Pick one, because you can't have both.
And these like this bathroom bill, and I just want to point out, like, these policies that are being created right now by the Republican Party. This is like new wave Republican. When third wave feminism started, and when the AIDS epidemic was at its strongest,
that's all it is. It's a distraction.
It is. It's in the 90s. There were protections that were put in place by the Republican and Democratic Party. That's when we started seeing protections for transgender people and for homosexual people. This is old. Like, this is not like this whole like discussion of who's using what bathroom and the these like protections for like gay identified people, like this is all just like fluff that's really distracting you from the issues. Like we are in a country right now where we're going through an economic crisis where we're having real battles and people are discussing who's using what bathroom and who's playing on what kids sports. When the Texas governor was asked for name one person name one person who has done this, he couldn't, and he was like, well, we're trying to be preventative. No, get the fuck out of here. Like this is it's a distraction. You're just doing talking points.
Yeah, that's it. With no real facts. Okay. Mundy, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. I so enjoyed meeting the both of you. Mundy has my contact, my cell phone number, and my email and all of that. Please send your number and your email to me because I would love to be in contact and figure out maybe other ways, even outside of this forum, that we could do some things because I it's not that often that I get to jump on a call like this where literally everybody on the call is fighting for the same thing. It's usually we're kind of battling each other. It's everybody's different opinion. So I love this conversation. I would love to
Welcome to the
continue.
remedy.
But I would
It was
also love to
wonderful to
find
meet
a
you,
way.
Deja. It's really great.
I would love to find a way for us to be able to kind of broaden this reach and move, because this conversation we just had should be on every platform, everywhere. And I think it would make such a tremendous difference. Mundy, I love you and I miss you. And I want to see you soon. We have to figure out a day now that things are opening back up when we're going to be in a health center or something at the same time, or just go grab lunch. And please tell your beautiful wife that I said hello.
I sure will. Thank you so much, Deja. Go ahead. I know you got
all right, everyone. And share my contact info.
All right. Wow. It's 1 o'clock. Actually, it's 7 after 1, and I did promise you guys we will keep you for about an hour. Tyler, I want to ask as we close, um, what would you say to a parent? And I know you do a lot of counseling and dealing with people are either not sure what's happening with their body and so forth, and some of them are transitioning. What would you say to a parent who has a son or a daughter who's going through this right now, and they themselves don't know how to even begin that conversation? Um, how what should they do? Are there any resources out there that they can tap into that can help them with that process?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that each situation is unique, so I think that every parent needs to navigate with their own child what is happening. What I will say is that parents. I do believe that a lot of the parents that I interact with are genuine in spirit, and they definitely have their child's best interest. And what I hear from a lot of parents is they understand how the world is, and they don't want their child to experience that world. And I understand that anxiety. But just as if a child goes through a neon colored face and in our minds, we're like, God, that looks terrible. You're still going to walk out the door with your child and let them dress the way that they want to dress. The same thing with the way that whatever gender they are presenting as, or if they are figuring themselves out, that should be supported as well. Identity development is going to dictate who that child is as an adult. And so, we think a lot about the, intersectionality, the person's identity, whether they are, Latinx, Black, whether they're white and transgender, or white and gay, Black and gay. We have all these intersectional identities, and then you throw in religion, the topic that we were discussing at the beginning, and what is being told to you. You don't want to tell your child that they're wrong. You just don't. And so parents can have that conversation. Parents can enroll themselves in therapy with a therapist who is competent in LGBTQ issues, so that they can learn how to have that discussion. In New York City, and I know in Philadelphia, there's the LGBTQ Community Center where there are parent support groups. You can ask your child what they're comfortable for. What I will say is, ask your child and be part of that conversation. You also don't want to force your child out. If your child is figuring it out, they might not be struggling with their gender, they might be struggling with their sexuality. It's a conversation, and people need to just be willing to have those conversations to facilitate that growth, because that's ultimately what you're doing. It's just like how they're going to be in school. You're facilitating growth, and identity is just as important as their grade in math. So
Would you any final words?
Um, I wanted to, Deja had to leave, so I want to thank her. Of course, I want to thank Tyler for coming on the show. I think this topic is extremely important, and I wanted to thank you, Mondi, because as a pastor, to even have this topic and this show, um, I know how impactful it will be to specifically um, people who are struggling and who are people of faith on how to deal with it from a parental level and also as a teen who may be struggling with this. And conversations like David just said, this conversations like this never happen. Um, not never, but they happen rarely. And then to add on that you're like Black and Haitian and all of this other stuff. So I want to give you your flowers while we're here because it's super important. So thank you. And it's been a great show.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Deja, for coming on the show, and Woody for arranging this and allowing Tyler to come and share his wealth of information with us as well. For me personally, I want to say this. Um, this distinction that we have this religion versus everything else. To me, it's time to stop, because there is a need for it. And Deja mentioned there are people in and her community who long to have a connection with God. And because of me, people like me or people like you and people like them, we shield them from experiencing the God who created them. And so what I'm asking, to all my pastors, my friends, is at least have a conversation. It begins with a conversation. It could be your own conversation with God. Figure out what's really bothering you inside. What's the fear? Deal with that on your knees before God, and then have that second conversation with people that are different than you. One thing I've learned when you watch the life of Jesus, that's all he did. He went after the ones that everybody didn't want to be with. Everybody that they didn't want to be bothered with. He went after them, and he sat with them, and he ate with them. They call him a lover of sinners. This is God they're talking about here, right? But he went after them. Why? Because he realized these people also have the same basic need that we have. They need that connection. They need that deep connection with God. And if we don't become it, who's gonna do it? If it's not Tyler, if it's not Woody, if it's not Deja, who's gonna do it? God is not supernaturally just gonna zap something from the universe and make it happen. He has to use you and I to do it. And so all I'm asking is that we allow ourselves to be an instrument. And
Mm.
we may, as you realize, even on the show today, I struggle with my terminology. I struggle with some of the things, but that's okay. We don't have to be perfect to have a conversation. We
Right.
just have to be honest and say, listen, I don't understand everything. I may not agree with everything you are saying, but this is where I stand. This is what I believe. This is what I know. Let's have a conversation and see if we can at least have a meal together at the end of the day. So with that, I want to say thank you
absolutely.
so much. It's been a very, very good show. I learned a lot. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Deja. And Tyler, I'll get your
Thank you for
information.
having me.
Yeah, and then make sure Deja gets it as well. But to
Yes.
those of you who were able to watch the show or who will be watching the show on Facebook and on YouTube, thank you so much, and we appreciate you. Happy birthday to Wendy,
Hey, yay!
Wendy, my
Happy
daughter,
birthday.
and
Happy
also
anniversary
an
to
anniversary of Ruby and Vincent, celebrating, I believe, 16 some years together. So this is awesome. So enjoy, guys. Have fun. And
Happy Pride.
yeah, yeah. Definitely. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We love
Happy
you.
Pride.
Yeah, and we out of here. Bye.
Bye.
You like what you hear? Tell a friend or a family member about the conversations that are happening live on The Remedy. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this with somebody that you know.